Hi everybody, in today's video we are going to be learning how to read and write from our Lambda functions to DynamoDB. And in order to do this, first what helps is understanding how to do it from the console. So in this video we are going to actually learn that. We're going to learn how to read and write using the AWS console to define our Lambda functions and our DynamoDB database. And then we can take these learnings and then make it more concrete in a more of a code-based deployment. So let's get started. In this case, I'm on my console homepage, and what I want to do is create my DynamoDB first. So you can either go off of your recently visit or you can search for DynamoDB. I have it recently visited, and this is my sandbox account. So I actually have no databases at this moment. So I can choose to create a database. And the table name is going to be called message. And we're going to be reading and writing messages from our database. We name the table message. We also need to have a partition key. In this case, it's going to be a message ID. And in this example, I'm using a UID. A UID translates as a string, so our partition key is a UID. Everything else can be the default settings. We're going to create a table, and now we have our new table. It's still being created, but it's called message, and it's going to be able to take in anything as long as it has a message ID as its partition key. I'm going to keep this tab open. I'm going to make another tab for creating our Lambda functions. So I'm going to go to our services, and I want to make a Lambda function. This is how we're going to write to our database. I have no functions in my sandbox, so I want to create a function. And I'm going to create a function offered from scratch. In this case, we are going to write to our DynamoDB first. So this is going to be called write message. And the runtime is Node.js 20.x. If you happen to be watching this video directed from one of my older videos, from probably 4 years ago, yes, it has upgraded that much. And that's probably why some of the code is not working. So this is what's important. Things change, and things change quickly. We have to stay up to speed. So we're going to create our function offered from scratch. It's called write message, and we create our function. Now, again, I'm showing you an example from writing it within the console. And this is to understand how to do something within the console. But in your day-to-day life as a developer, you will want to actually store this in your own source controlled environment. So we've successfully created our function. It's called write message. And then from here, we can actually change it within the console what we want to do. And of course, they also make sure that we know that we can use Amazon Q if we wanted to. This is actually, the console is a virtual Visual Studio Code. This is a nice little intro if you're not familiar with it. So I'm going to take some code and I'm going to walk through with you what has changed. This is the default code that Amazon has provided. We're not going to be using any of it. I'm going to bring in some code and I'll walk through what it does. So first, I am importing our DynamoDB client. This is the AWS SDK version 3. We are importing in our DynamoDB client, and then we import in the document client, and in this case, because I am writing a message, the put command. The put command will either create the item or update the item. After these imports are done, we are creating a global variable that is the client. So this is creating the DynamoDB client. In this case, I created our DynamoDB table within US East 1, and that's where it is accessing it. After that, we create the document client, and this is what we use to write to the DynamoDB database. So we have a handler. The handler is what was originally populated from AWS when we created the scratch file. So we're taking in our handler. It has an event and the context. We're not using the event in this example. We're using the context to capture the request ID from our context message. And I'll walk through when we do a test so you can see what that AWS request ID is. And then we're calling a function called createMessage. If everything works, we're returning back a status code of 201. 201 means that something was successfully created and there's no body with it. Otherwise, if it errors, we're going to throw a 500 error code and it's going to let us know there was an error when we were trying to create this message. So when we look at our createMessage function, this writes the message to our DynamoDB table. So createMessage is called, we create our parameters. Within our parameters, we are setting our message ID to that request ID, and we're hard coding our message in this example to be hello from Lambda. We take these parameters, we create a put command. The put command sets those parameters, and then we send that message to our DynamoDB client. Now, this code has all been just copied and pasted in there, and you can go to my GitHub and copy and paste your code, but this code has not been deployed. If you want to test this code, you need to make sure you click deploy. And that's going to deploy our code to our environment. And you can see up here, now it's been successfully updated. In order to test this code, now we need to go to our test tab. I'm going to test this code and I'm going to let you know right now it is not going to work. And that's okay. So we hit test. And you see a green check mark and you might think, oh yay, everything works. But no, if you expand it, the status code that we sent back was 500. There was an error creating this message. And why was there an error? Well, we do not have permissions to write to our DynamoDB, right? So if you actually look at the log output, the access was denied because we are not able to perform the put action on our DynamoDB database. So we need to be able to do that. So how would we do that? Well, we have to set up our IAM policies. So we can go to the configuration tab of our Lambda function, and we want to do our role name. So we're going to go over here. This is permissions. So make sure you're on permissions, and we can go to the role name. And when I click that role name, it opens up our IAM management here. And this is the roles for that Lambda function. And we want to add a new permission. So let's create an inline policy. And within here, this is specifying specific permissions. We're going to choose our service. So it's DynamoDB. And we need to determine the actions that are allowed. Okay? This is the write message function. And all we are trying to do is to put an item, right? So that's the put command. In AWS, we should follow, and actually in anything in general, we should follow like the least privilege. On the account that this function is only ever going to put, it does not need any other action. It only needs the put item action. All right? So the only action we need to give it is put item. We don't need to give it any more because it doesn't need that. And this is going to protect you in the future. All right? So least privilege. So we go with our put item, and then we need to specify the ARN that we are going to be using here. We're doing this to a specific table, our write message table. So we want to add the ARN. Okay? What is our ARN? Well, that's why I kept a tab open for our DynamoDB. So we go back here, we go into our message table, and you can expand the additional information. There is my ARN. That's ARN stands for Amazon Resource Name. So I copy that. I'm going back to my create policy, pasting it here, and that sets it, right? So we have our resource region, the resource name, and the ARN. So you could make this for any table, you could make this for any region. Think about that when you're setting it up. For now, we're going with the least privilege. We're specifically only writing to US East 1. We don't need to give it for every region. We do not need to give it for any table name. So it is better to narrow the permissions. We add that ARN, we click next, and now we need to give a meaningful policy name for this. So I'm just gonna actually call this write message and then DynamoDB. I'm sure you could do a little more meaningful. Maybe I wanted to add like US East 1. This is good enough for me for this policy name. So I'm creating the policy. The policy was created, and you can see that that has now been added as the permissions on this write message role here. That write message role goes back to our Lambda function. So this has now been added. If I click test, get a green check mark, and even better, status code 201 has been added. So let's verify that it actually has been created in our message table. So I'm going back to my message tab. This is message table for DynamoDB, and I'm going to export our table items. And here it is, hello from Lambda. If we go back to this message here, we want to verify that was the request ID, ended it with an ED2, and it started with a D3D. And here we have a D3D and ED2. So there it is. It has been successfully written to our DynamoDB. So let's now take this knowledge and do a read message. Let's go back here to our Lambda function, go back to our functions, and create a new function named read message. This is perfect time that if you wanted to test your knowledge, you could create your own read message and then come back and double check your work afterwards, right? So we create our read message the same way we did write message. Read message has been successfully created with the placeholder code that Amazon has provided us. I'll take our code for our read message, paste in the code. So similarly to before, we are importing in our DynamoDB client. We're setting our libraries. In this case, instead of the put command, we're doing our scan command. We need to set up the client, reading from US East 1. We create our document client, and then we have our handler. So again, our handler has our event and our context. When we start reading from our message, we're going to have a read message, and we're going to make sure to log each message that we have. And then what we're going to return is a JSON object of the items that have been inside the DynamoDB. So read message is really where all the work is happening, right? So in this case, our read message is going to read 10 messages from our DynamoDB table, because we could have a lot more than 10 messages. So we're just limiting it. So in this case, we set up our parameters as our table name being message. The limit is 10, and then we issue a scan command. So the scan command is sending over these parameters, and it's going to read the database and take in the top 10 of our DynamoDB table. So we issue the scan command, we send that over to our DocumentDB client. So if we take this, first, one, we have undeployed code, so we deploy it. And now we need to test our code. So we'll go test. And will it work? Well, if you remember from last time, even though we're going to get this green check mark, it should not work, right? We have a 500. Why do we have a 500? Well, it is not authorized to perform the operation on our scan. So we have to do the same thing we did before for our write message. With our IAM policies, we need to update this. So we go to our configuration, go to our role name. In this case, we are going to add our inline policy, DynamoDB. In this case, we only want to read, and we're only doing the scan operation. So we're doing our scan. We're adding our ARN. This has already been previously copied. It's our US East 1, our message table. So we're going to add the ARN. Click next. In this case, the policy name is going to be scan message DynamoDB. We're going to create the policy. Now the policy has been successfully created. If we go back to our read message function and we click test, There it is, status code 200, reading in the message hello from Lambda. So we want to double check this. We can go back to our Lambda functions. I'm going to go to Lambda, click our write message, and do another test where we have again inserted another Lambda function. And if I go to our read message and we click test, we now have 2 messages. So there you have it. You have learned how to read and write to DynamoDB using Lambda in the AWS console. If you liked what you learned, please subscribe to my channel. And in our video, I will show you how to do all this within your own IDE. In my case, will be Visual Studio Code. And then we will use Serverless Framework to deploy this code using GitHub Actions. Until then, happy learning.